time, long ago in ancient Japan, there were many wandering monks. Now these monks came into two categories. There were those who actively were called to follow the way of the Buddha, and these were relatively few in number. And the others were those who donned the monks' robes because it gave them some impunity against evil, robbers, etc. And it also elicited the largess of people. There was a monk called Fuji, we'll call him Fuji for short, and he fell into the second category. He'd donned the monk's robes because he wanted to wander the world and have experiences, but he had no real calling. One day when Fuji was walking down the road, he came across a soothsayer, one of those physiognomists, if that's the word, that read your fortune in your face. Now, he met this soothsayer when the soothsayer was obviously in a mood of largess himself and was willing to give Fuji a reading on his life without any recompense or trade, because Fuji had nothing. So the soothsayer told him that he would excel in his studies and whatever endeavors that he pursued in an earthly way of learning, but that he wouldn't live beyond the age of 40. But if he wanted to live longer, he should actively cultivate and seek enlightenment. Well, Fuji, of course, was very shocked to hear this news, and he immediately took himself off to a cave in the mountains, where he began in earnest the practice of the devotions and those things that were dictated by the teachings of the Buddha. And every evening he would undertake one special ritual to the Bodhisattva Jizo. Now the years passed, and in his mid-30s, Fuji's body began to become weak, and it grew weaker and weaker until, in fact, he died. Now, just after Fuji's death, two burly, demonic-looking beings came along to haul him away, to hell, obviously. And Fuji said, "Where are you taking me? I've been a good ascetic. I've practiced the rituals for all of these years. How can you take me to hell?" But they were not to be deterred, and they hauled him off to the fiery realms. Well, Fuji was going off all the way. He said, but he said, "I've heard of a Chinese man who was evil all his life, and on his deathbed he called out to the Bodhisattva, and the Buddha himself came along, and the fires of hell became a breeze, and he was taken off to paradise." And then he said, "If this is to no avail, what is the purpose of all the bodhisattvas living the lives that they've lived? All the ascetics, all the good works, all the practices are useless." Well, the two demons said, "We have no proof that you are worthy of the Buddha's compassion." But just at that moment, a diminutive little monk appeared, and he had with him 3 other diminutive little monks, and behind them there were about a dozen others. Soon as the demonic-looking being saw them, oh, they said, we'll have to let you go. And then the diminutive little monk said to Fuji, don't you recognize who I am? I'm the Bodhisattva Jiso. He said, your karma has necessitated that you come here, but your practices mean that you can now return to life, unburdened by any of the cares of the world. And 1.5 days after Fuji's body had seemed to drop, he revived. And he set off to wander the path of life, continuing his devotions and his practices. And he lived to about 90 years old. And at 90 years old he was still hale and healthy, but he knew that his time had come. So he sat, facing the west, and allowed himself to go into nirvana. This raises a question for us, as these stories do. Having traversed our path, having had our challenges, our precipitators, what now for you is the meaning, the efficacy, the purpose of practice, devotion, one-pointedness? Karma, cause and effect, conditioning, accretions, accumulations, devotion, practice, one-pointedness. Is it some kind of scales? Is there really some balance that is brought here? In this story, it's not so. Your karma has brought you here, like the tragedies of life. Hell is nothing more than our tragedies. What did they precipitate? What purpose have they had? What is the meaning of actively pursuing a path of enlightenment? What are you going to tell people? If they come to you having lost a child, had their house burned down, lose all their possessions, what are you going to tell them? Actively pursue a path of enlightenment? No. What has it done for us? We're looking at the deep, deep meaning of these stories. What is it? It is your understanding. be that this has a direct relationship with stillness and movement? These stories are told for the purpose of perhaps allowing us to understand and answer this basic question. How do stillness and movement manifest in your life? Perhaps, if you can, look to the deep awareness that arises in you out of this story, we can come closer to answering that question.